One of the most common questions and dilemmas that comes up for seekers upon being told that they should practice self-inquiry or surrender at every waking moment is how this is compatible with other activities in life, especially those that seem to require mental effort, like reading or working, right? Or complicated interactions with people. Those things seem to require our attention and our thinking. So the belief goes, well, how is that going to be compatible with self-inquiry when self-inquiry is sort of sucking up all the attention? So there's a few different answers you could give to this, depending on sort of one's level of understanding. One level, one could say, okay, well, it's a little difficult at first. So when there's an intense conflict like that, drop inquiry for the moment if it's too overwhelming, and then come back to it, right? That's sort of one level of understanding. And then the sort of next higher level of understanding might be, well, it's something that requires practice. So start practicing being able to do inquiry or surrender at the same time, and it will get easier with time. And that's sort of a second level of understanding. But a third and sort of the highest level of understanding is that this whole question comes from the very thing that we are doing inquiry or surrender to penetrate, namely the egoic illusion. The illusion that you are the experiencer and the doer, and therefore the illusion that you are the one who chooses where their attention goes. Thinking as an act of choice, as an act of I'm deciding how to think, where to apply my attention, all of that is actually not done by you. Whether it happens or it doesn't happen, whether it happens well or it happens poorly, all of that is happening, you could say, if it happens at all, at the mind level. And you could say it happens because of karma, or you could say it happens because of God, but either way, it doesn't happen because of you. What you think you are, which is to say the doer of thought, is precisely what has to be seen through. Inquiry, in fact, does not and cannot interfere with the thinking and the actions that you are bound to do. Whatever thinking and actions those are, whether they're good or bad, successful or not, are going to happen regardless. And the interposing of inquiry into that story doesn't change what's going to happen. But you might say, but aren't I doing inquiry? Isn't that an action? Isn't that a thought process? And the answer is, it might seem like that at first, but it isn't. Because inquiry is actually pointing to something beyond the thought process. Inquiry or surrender is not actually an action. It might appear to be an action, but the end of that action will be to see that it wasn't an action, that it was actually your whole nature the entire time. And it's paradoxical, and it's incomprehensible to the mind that this is true, but it is true. That surrender and self-inquiry, though they may seem to be actions that interfere with other things, are in fact not actions of that kind. They appear to be, but they aren't. They appear to be from the ignorant perspective that considers oneself the doer and the experiencer. That perspective is precisely what is penetrated or abolished, seen to be a misconception, through self-inquiry and surrender. In fact, self-inquiry and surrender go past even the seeing through of that illusion, showing that the illusion never existed. So this is how the pattern goes, right? These kinds of doubts arise that are based on the misconception that one is the doer of thought. And to those very doubts, one must raise the question, if an inquiry who has this dilemma? Who has this issue? Right? And that is the process of inquiry, right? To penetrate to the I, right? When these thoughts come up, to show how they are in fact in the light of the I. And the same with surrender. If one is surrendering, one ignores those thoughts. One ignores all those thoughts, which isn't to say that one doesn't think. One might think, but that thinking will happen involuntarily. It's not the job of the inquirer or the surrenderer to repress or suppress thought. That might happen automatically, but it's not the job of the self-inquirer or surrenderer to do that. It's the job of the self-inquirer or surrenderer to keep their attention focused on self-inquiry or surrender. And other thoughts may come and go, and other actions may come and go, and they will come and go, and they will happen as they will happen. And the reality is that self-inquiry or surrender doesn't change that, though it may appear to. That self-inquiry and surrender appear like separate actions that could potentially take up the bandwidth of the mind, leaving less for other things. But that's an illusion. Which is not to say that if you do self-inquiry or surrender that everything will go just as it was going before. It might well change. It might well be what you might call worse or better. Anything might happen. But the reality is it's not really self-inquiry or surrender that causes that. Those things happen for their own reasons, whatever those are. And actually, at the deepest level, you could say, do those things happen at all? The end result of self-inquiry and surrender is that when that question is asked, the mind simply goes silent. So, it's an extremely compelling illusion to say, how could self-inquiry or surrender possibly be sustained while doing other mentally demanding tasks? But ironically, it is that very compelling feeling that self-inquiry and surrender are designed to show is false. It is a false worry. Self-inquiry and surrender are merely pointing to the fact that one is outside what one thinks of as a thought process. There's nothing one can do to alter that thought process in the end. It goes along its own sequence of maturation. And can require some degree of faith to follow that reasoning, With inquiry, it's maybe a little bit less faith because one is saying, well, who has this doubt? That's sort of hitting at the base assumption behind the doubt. Who has this question about how to do inquiry while one's doing other tasks? Surrender might be a little bit more faith. And again, if it just seems totally impossible and too difficult, then the solution is to do what you can. Try to practice mixing them, or one level lower, which is nothing wrong with this, it's just where you are, is do inquiry and surrender during periods when you're not doing such mentally challenging tasks, and then come back to it. And eventually that will grow and spread and become more and more prevalent in your day-to-day life.